I think 100% anytime you're accessing an account that has access to your financials, you need to make sure you are not distracted. And if you are using a browser, you need to be typing in or at least have saved the web address of that company so that you're going to the trusted URL, the
Right.
secure URL.
Right.
I think using password managers, but also looking at that two-factor authentication and potentially using something like Duo or Okta Verify versus
Mhm.
the SMS 2FA.
Welcome, everyone, to the Smarter Online Safety Podcast. I'm your host, Jocelyn King, and I am super excited about the conversation we're having today. I am so pleased to introduce you to Shawn Turnbull. Shawn is just an incredible woman who has worked in tech for years, and she's worked in small private business and large business. She's currently head of customer success at JFrog, and she has worked in so many tech companies. She's ex Red Hat, and she works as a in the whole women in tech model. And she's just an incredible leader and human being. And it's just a delight to have you on the show. So welcome, Shawn.
Hi, Jocelyn. Thank you for having me.
That's so great. And Shawn shared a story with me that I just found so deeply resonating with so many other stories I hear. And I think particularly because she's a woman in tech, just like I was a woman in tech when I was targeted and had these horrible cyber crimes happen to me. A lot of people think, oh, well, if you work in tech, or whether you're a software engineer or just somebody who works in tech and knows tech well, it still happens cybercrime knows no boundaries. Cybercrime targets even people who work in cybersecurity and everything else. And so I loved having Shawn on to share, and she so graciously agreed to share her story because there's such great learnings here for everybody as individuals and consumers around the type of targeting she's going to share with you. And then also, especially for small business owners, because it ties to that as well. So, Shawn, anything you want, please tell some people a little bit more about, your background, and then let's if you could just share your story. It is just so enlightening to everybody to learn how this happens.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I have worked in deep infrastructure technology for well over 20 years now. And my sister, who lives less than a mile from me, is a hairstylist. And so in the early 2000s, she and I and my mom founded a luxury hair salon in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Mhm.
It's a pretty large company now. We have over 50 employees in multiple locations. And obviously, I don't work there on a day-to-day basis because I work in the technology industry, but I am still a part of the ownership team that steers the strategic direction of the company. And I am involved in a lot of our financial decisions. So that is how I came to be involved in this particular story with the Alter Ego Salon brand.
Awesome. And so paint the picture of what was happening on your weekend when the event that we're talking about happened.
Uh, yeah, so the salon is one of those businesses that runs 24/7. We are open. Our salon companies are open 7 days a week, and we run multiple shifts a day in the salon. So we are usually open from 8 a.m. in the morning until 10 p.m. at night. But we're always on. We use text messaging to communicate with our clients, and we have added remote work to our our capabilities now for our customer service team. So this did happen on a weekend, and I don't work as often on the weekend, even though I am in customer success. There are things that come up with some of our enterprise customers on the weekend, but luckily for me, that's usually an off time. And I was enjoying it with my family when I got a message from one of our leaders in the salon about a hiring process. They were in negotiations with a potential candidate, and they wanted to know if they could offer more than we had discussed to the candidate. I needed to check and see what the current leaders were, how they were currently compensated in order to answer that question fairly, I believed. And I decided, unfortunately, to do that while I was holding my baby from my phone. And that was the beginning of this incident.
But you know that I just want to point that out because first of all, so many people listening are working parents. And they understand that. And even if they're not working parents, we all have things that we're in the middle of doing while
Yeah.
something comes up that we need to respond to. And we need to, pause it and in essence kind of try to multitask, or you're trying to do something from work while you're at, you could be at a sporting event or a baseball game, or with your, or your kids are at a
Mhm.
swim meet or a soccer tournament or whatever. So everybody experiences those. Or you're just out go between the gym and the grocery store, but you're trying to take care of something on the go, and that is so common. Who doesn't experience that on a daily or weekly basis? And that's what's so relevant about this.
Yeah. Being distracted for me was the first step in being hacked.
Yes. So that's a great point. Great point. So because you don't have your full focus on it the way you
Mhm.
were just in work mode at your computer, let's say, or something like that. Correct. So that's a great tip for everybody is to be much more vigilant when you know you're out of your normal environment where you're either working on your business or you're doing your banking, or
Right.
logging into your look at your retirement or anything. And everybody does this, I mean, some of the statistics are that 90% of what we do that way is now on our phone on the go. So everybody experiences exactly your situation.
Yeah, so there were a couple takeaways for me before I even tell the story. The first one is I don't access financial accounts or even accounts where I have that have access to my financials when I'm distracted any longer. I find a time where I can sit down and focus, and I know I'm not going to be interrupted. But also, when I was using my phone to access our payroll provider and HR system, I this particular company does not have an app, and apps on our phones are inherently more secure than using a browser.
Yep.
So I was using the browser, and we are looking to migrate to a provider who offers an app, which would increase our confidence that we're accessing that solution securely if we are doing it in a mobile way without
Right.
distraction, of course.
Right. And one reason I'll point that out is because a lot of time when you're working on an app, things are contained within the app and you've got that known environment. And so you're not as likely to have the pop-ups and pop-backs for malware and things like that you get on a regular desktop or in a browser experience. So that's a great point, Shawn. Thank you for pointing that out to our listeners.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So then what you're with your family, you got your baby in your arms and you're
I
trying
got a
and then what happened?
baby on one hip and some cartoon running and an 8-year-old asking me for food, and my husband's running the vacuum cleaner in the background. But I got this text. I needed to know what our other leaders were paid. And I decided to log into our payroll and HR system from my phone.
Mhm.
I go there all the time. So typically, my passwords are saved in my password system. But like I said, this company doesn't offer an app. So I was using the Chrome browser, and I typed, how you can really quickly pull down with your thumb on your phone, even if you're on the home screen and it pulls up a search
Yes.
a search bar.
Uh-huh.
So I did that versus typing in the domain for the HR provider, and I just typed in the name of the app that I wanted to access,
So you're
the
typing in
online.
the name of the company. It's just like if people are searching for their bank or credit union or, anything,
Right.
any e-commerce thing or anything, and you're looking for your browser to give you the top results.
Right. And I just did this because I'm using my thumb and my other hand is busy.
Yes.
And that's, the next takeaway and why I needed to be, not distracted because it would have been much safer to type in the secure web address of the HR vendor versus searching for it online. But I used the phone's functionality to search, typed in their name, and then, of course, my phone spit out some web addresses for me, and these were indexed by Google. So what happened is the hackers had targeted this HR payroll company. This was a scheme that was already known by law enforcement. It was already known by my HR payroll provider, and it was already known by the banks, which ended up saving us.
Mhm.
But I wanted to mention that because it was a very large scale attack. It was not, targeting us specifically.
Right.
And
By the way, in this day and age, you have to assume that every financial institution and every payroll company and every credit union and every investment thing is targeted and that there's going to be results. So I think if you assume that no matter what you're searching for, there's going to be, if you make the assumption that there's at least one of the choices you're going to get is scammers, you're going to have a
yeah,
more critical eye for what you're clicking on too. So that's another
yeah.
tip. Thank you.
That's exactly right. So the hackers had paid for a for Google for the Google search algorithm for paid search, and they had a website that posed as our HR provider. But instead of being www.yourhrsolution.com, it was like VRR dot your hrsolution.com or something like
And it
that.
could be off by just one character as well.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it was very minor, and then the way it showed up, they were paying for the pictures and whatnot, so they used the logo of our HR provider. And in my distraction, I clicked on that.
Hmm.
When I landed on the login page, it looked exactly like our HR provider's login page. There was zero difference. They were able to clone it entirely.
Right.
And so from there, I typed in my login ID and password.
Hmm.
Um, and it didn't take initially.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
so that was my first clue. So I guess what happened is I use a secure uh, keychain platform. One of those ones
Right.
where you save your passwords.
A password management system that
Right.
will keep them for you. Correct. Hmm.
Yes, exactly. And so some of those are more difficult to access on your phone. If the
Hmm.
phone will say, okay, this password, you're going to pull up this password, secure password management tool,
Right.
but it doesn't always save for the apps like it does on your computer,
Right.
and so it's a little less reliable, I think that it's going to provide your password for the phone. So I was also sort of used to that happening. Okay, it's not going to pop up my password.
Right.
So that's the first thing that happened is the password manager did not pop up my password, which is because I was at the wrong URL.
Right.
It didn't recognize the URL. But
I'm
in my
just say
distraction,
for people listening who don't use a password manager, when you save a password, you're telling it what the email or username is that you're logging in with. You're telling it you're giving it the HTTPS colon slash the URL of where you want it to log you in, and then you're letting it create a password for you. And so what Shawn's talking about is when you go in to say open and fill, it's going to take you to the correct um, to the correct URL and then log you in. But there sometimes are an extra step or two you have to take. There's still a perfecting of the science that companies are working on, and so that's what Shawn's alluding to. So that
Yeah.
yeah,
It's sort of the difference between like an app and a browser. It should work 100% of the time in the browser, but you have to call it up for apps often on your phone. So I was sort
right,
of used to that inconsistency. And
yeah,
when it didn't provide my password, I remember it for that website. So
yeah,
that's when I decided to type it in. And that
hmm
was, I think we've counted at least three mistakes at this point. That was the next mistake is that I, should have been alerted that my password manager is not providing the credentials for this website. And that should have at least made me go back and check, am I at the right place? But again, I was distracted and frustrated, used to it not working consistently. So I typed in my password and then it took me to the page for your dual factor authentication, two-factor
right,
authentication,
right,
2FA,
hmm
which for this HR provider is a text with a code.
hmm
And so that's the next learning scenario. That is also insecure, and it's much better to use something like Okta Verify or Duo
hmm
than to use text because text can be hacked in this way.
right,
But again, this HR payroll provider didn't offer that as a solution.
right,
Um, and again, another reason why we're looking to migrate now. So I received the text with my 2FA key,
hmm
and that did come from the payroll provider.
hmm
And I typed in my 2FA key into the site where I believed I was at the HR system,
right,
and then it failed. At this point, I was super frustrated and realized that I was, way too distracted to be doing this on my phone. And I put my phone down and said, I will get back to this when I have time to focus. I obviously can't do it with the baby on my hip and all this stuff going on.
right.
And I came back to it later that evening.
Okay.
Um, and so that was, again, probably my fifth mistake is when I realized that it didn't log me in, I should have known that there was something wrong and I should have investigated it immediately
Mhm.
versus saying, okay, I'm too distracted. I needed to remove the distractions and right then look and see what had
Right.
happened because I
And
had
if I
combined
could, I just want to
multiple
add,
factors.
yeah, and if what I'd like to add is that, you didn't do anything wrong. You did what humans do. You're thinking, okay, I'm distracted. I'm going to get back to this later. We all would. That's the natural. You're thinking, okay, I'm too distracted to do it, which legitimately you are. But the thing is that is what cyber criminals and hackers rely on. They rely on confusion. They rely on all these little ways to overcome your fear or your spidey sense or, that shouldn't be happening. But it is because, let's face it, we work with tech so often where things that are supposed to be easy aren't, that we're conditioned to these problems being normal. And
Yeah.
so you did what every other human would do, which is, just think, okay, I'll get back to this later. And that's what cyber criminals rely on. They rely on our behavior of being human. So, because
Yeah.
I just want to say too, I've known you for a while and you are so crazy smart and both, brain knowledge, and street savvy. And if it can happen, and you work in tech, and if it can happen to you, and it happened to me, and I was working in tech, and I know people who work in cyber security who have been hacked. If it can happen to people with that, it can happen to anybody. And I think that's the key point. And there is zero correlation between intelligence and being a victim of cybercrime. And I really want to say that for people because everybody I speak to has been through it. And I certainly went through it myself. You think, what did I do wrong? Or I did something Or like I remember thinking, oh gosh, I was so stupid to do this and that. You just don't know. You're not stupid if you're uninformed and you don't know yet. And most of us don't know. And frankly, that's why I started this podcast, was to help give people the 101 knowledge they need to protect themselves so that they're not blaming themselves. You know, we don't want to blame the victim. We want to keep the blame where it belongs, and we want to be protecting ourselves from these bad guys. So I just wanted to say that for everybody out there, because you have a right to, to think, okay, something's wrong here and I need to investigate it, but it's completely human to think, okay, I'll get back to this later. You just want to start learning these clues so that you know when you need to not put it off and when you need to take action now. And that's so important about what you're telling us, Shawn. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And you and I met originally in your capacity as an executive coach.
Mhm.
And one of the things that we talked about was the importance of emotional intelligence in
Mhm.
our career success, and maybe even more important than our actual intelligence. It's like, how do your emotions control the actions that you take and how you react to situations?
Right,
And I think I can clearly see in this situation, I had a sense of urgency around bringing on this candidate that probably was not real. I was anxious because I was pulled in a lot of directions
right,
with my family, but I wanted to complete this. I was frustrated with the technology, and all of
right.
those emotional factors clouded my actual judgment in the situation. So,
And you
um,
just described every executive, every
ex-
working professional, every student, every stay-at-home parent, every person looking for a job, everybody who's in the middle of a move. You just described everybody. So that is so true.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So then what happened? So then what happened, as we like to say?
so, so then what happened is I got a notice
Mhm.
via email that
Mhm.
evening that a special payroll was being run. I actually didn't think anything of it because we do run special payrolls from time to time, and payroll is not my responsibility.
Right.
And we were right on our upcoming payroll date. So
Right.
I knew that we were in the process of building and running payroll.
By the way, that is not an accident. The cyber criminals who target this understand payrolls like first and 15th and or those types of things. They also understand Fridays. They can also, through social engineering, gain access to learning when certain companies have payroll. So we think that's locked up information, but it's actually highly, the algorithms kind of tell them, and social engineering can tell them more of the specifics. So things that you think are highly confidential and behind a locked door are actually very easy for hackers to either guess or know. And so
Mhm.
if this had been happening a week before in between payroll, you might have had even a bigger flag. But the fact that they're timing it to your payroll is again part of a classic scam.
Right. Yeah. So this particular hacker had set up this fake website, waited for me to put my credentials in.
Mhm.
Then they sort of swivel chair put the credentials into the payroll site, the real payroll site, which
Right.
produced a text to me
Mhm.
to provide my 2FA key.
Mhm.
I provided the 2FA key to the hackers, believing that it was the real payroll site, and said then they had access to my account. And I think they were lucky that we were right in the payroll cycle. There
Right.
was no way for me to know at that point that they had access to my account. So they may have waited, like you said, until there was a
Right.
payroll cycle because they were able to log in then and see, what our cadence was. And I'm sure
Right.
everything that they did was very scripted.
Right.
Um,
At this point, they have access to the entire account, and the account alarms aren't going off because they're using legitimate credentials. So the
that's
system,
right.
while the system may recognize that, you're logging in from a different location, even then, hackers have gotten very sophisticated about having, their ISP is not suddenly coming from the Midwest or the Middle East or wherever they are. They can spoof systems to look like they're coming from close to where you're physically located. So all
Mhm.
of that means that the alarms are not going off.
That's right.
Mhm.
And we probably had too many people in our company who were getting those alarms and no real, this is the other thing that we corrected after the fact. If I received those emails saying that we're doing an off-cycle payroll or something has changed, now we have a system to share that internally. So everyone sees it and we're able to confirm, yes, we are doing an off-cycle payroll or something, some information in the system has changed.
Yeah.
So what the hackers actually did is they logged in as an administrator and they changed direct deposit information for our employees. And before we had a chance to react to any of that, they ran an off-cycle payroll, and they redirected $75,000 into their own accounts through that off-cycle payroll.
Right. And
And
that's the
so,
other thing. They have these legitimate accounts set up in waiting. They're they're
mhm,
they're basically traps, like if you're hunting
mhm.
game, you have these things waiting and there's no funny activity going on. So the banks they've opened them with aren't flagged and they're just kind of sitting in wait for catching big game. And then when this happened, they were seeing the opportunity.
Yeah. And we're a large, in terms of a small business, we're a pretty large and frequent payroll provider through this HR company. So we actually have the benefit of having an immediate draft, which gives our employees their deposits within 24 hours of our payroll run.
Hmm.
Which is another thing that caught us. This benefit wasn't as much of a benefit in this case. And so we actually flagged it pretty quickly because we saw the payroll run. We didn't recognize the amount of the payroll, and we were able to put it together when we got notices that those individuals' direct deposit had
And is
changed.
all of this happening in the first 24 hours or
This is all happening within 12 hours,
perfect?
the
Okay,
first 12 hours.
great.
We called our bank right away, and the bank actually told us to talk to the payroll provider, which at that point was wrong. It's just one of those big banks, and you're talking to somebody who, doesn't really care to help you that much, has wrong information, and you have to know
Right.
what to tell them.
Hmm.
So one of the other owners called the bank and was told to go back to the payroll provider. At that moment, the bank actually still had the money. The transfer had not been made. So if we, argued with them and asked to speak to a supervisor and said, we need to make sure we stop this money from leaving our account,
Stop
you know,
this wire. We'll sort it out later, even. But
yes, we could have stopped it at the bank. But a number of hours went by before we were able to get in touch with the payroll provider because of the hours that their customer service team is open. And
right.
in that time, the funds left the bank
Okay. They left
and they
your
went
bank on the way to the hacker's bank.
to the hackers. The funds were transferred to the hackers' banks.
Yeah.
Luckily for us, the this was a known scheme, and the destination banks had already flagged those accounts
Hmm.
as fraudulent accounts jointly with law enforcement.
Okay.
So they held the funds versus depositing the funds in the account for the hackers.
Got it. So just for everybody listening, it left your bank, went to the funds were wired to the hacker's bank, but they were not distributed into the individual accounts. They were basically being held by the bank in cooperation with law enforcement while they were investigating this because they did have flags. So that was
Yeah.
good. And unfortunately for other people probably who had gone through this, the reason it was flagged is because there were already some people who had had this happen and had some deposits made and accounts drained. That's probably why law enforcement was involved. And so, if you're the first one to have this happen to you, you can really run into problems of even trying to get your money back or anything. You might have lost it depending on how much responsibility you had for um, for wiring things versus actually being hacked. So, because I've spoken to others who have actually, there's some people who lose all the money and other people who are able to get it back. And in your case, thank goodness, the bank and law enforcement were already on top of it.
Yeah, so that really saved us. However, it still took us over 20 days to get the funds back. from the banks. They had to transfer those funds back to our bank.
We're talking
And
about a large sum of money, particularly for a small business. I mean, that's like all of it. That's all of your reserves, right? So you have to,
that,
and if you're trying to make real payroll, you need like bridge loans or all kinds of things to try to backfill.
Yeah, that's right. So we actually had a line of credit that we had untapped that was sort of sitting out there waiting in case we needed it. And
Right,
we were able to tap on that to run our payroll. But if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have time to have gotten approved for one
right,
and run our payroll on time,
right,
which is a big problem for small businesses. Not being able to run payroll could end up, shuttering your company.
right. And by the
So,
way, let me just throw a couple stats in here too, because that's a key thing. And I've mentioned this previously, but so whether you own a small business or do business with a small business or have a friend or family member who runs one, first of all, small businesses face cyber attacks every 11 seconds. That is a new stat that just came out this last month. Every 11 seconds. So you're being protected by some of the systems and stuff you have in place. And over 50% of attacks are targeting small business because you don't have the IT resources and the wherewithal, and everybody knows small businesses. Everybody's wearing, 10 hats, your chief cook and bottle washer and everything. And you don't have a cybersecurity team and millions of dollars to spend on cybersecurity the way the large corporates do. So you're much more likely to have that. And 75% of small businesses last year experienced at least one cyber attack. 75%, 3 out of 4. So and it's increasing. And now with AI, it's increasing even more. And that's something for you to think about both as a consumer, but then also if you are a small business owner or have a small business or are thinking of starting one. But things that we all need to know. And we can't afford as a world to have all of our small businesses go through this because 60% of small businesses that go through an attack do not recover and shutter their doors within 6 months. They cannot recover financially. They've lost their data. They lose customers who are upset that things were taken. So it affects all of us, and that's why I'm so grateful and happy to have Shawn on telling the story because it is so real and significant to all of us. So let me let you keep going, but I just wanted to throw those statistics in because those are very sobering facts.
it's true. And we realized that we were just, a very small part of a large, large scheme, and that this is happening, very frequently.
Right.
And we were just lucky that we have been in business for 17 years and we were as large as we are because we were able to, kind of survive this. It was a difficult situation, but if it had happened to us maybe, 4 years into our business when we were still, kind of in the red,
Mhm.
and we didn't have the credit rating that we have now, and we didn't
Right.
have the staff that we have now.
And the line of credit and
That's right.
and yeah, all of that.
That's
Yeah.
right. We would have really had trouble. But we did realize that we needed to take some additional precautions going forward.
Hmm.
One is, and a lot of these things seem obvious in retrospect, right? But we don't run payroll out of our, main account for business operations any longer. It was small business, and we grew from nothing.
Hmm.
And for many, many years, we had nothing. And, we needed to operate all out of one account because cash flow is king when you're in
Right.
those first 5 years and
Well, you pay more money for each additional account, and you got to
that's
up.
right.
You're trying to save money when you're starting a business, so that's totally
Right.
understandable. Yeah. Hmm.
Right. So yeah, when you're trying to just kind of get into the black, you never quite have enough for anything. It's got to all be in one place. But once you're bigger, it makes a lot of sense to separate things out. So we'll run payroll now from an account that doesn't have funds in it prior to the time that we're ready to run payroll. So if
Right.
someone were to try to run an off cycle payroll out of that account, they wouldn't be able to do it.
Right.
And
So,
we
so
also,
just for people who are small business owners, like let's say they have the exact situation you have, and they're not ready to get that extra account right now, what would be the one tip you would offer them? because we all know somebody who runs a small business, and we all do business, whether it's our veterinarian or our tax preparer or something, we very likely work with a smaller business if we're not working with a large corporate. So what's a tip? So for instance, if you were still smaller, would the tip be that if you get that alert that you have to have more immediate communication on, hey, is this a legitimate payroll? Who's running payroll? So everybody could say we're not running payroll, and then like what tip would you offer there?
I think for small businesses, commercial banks, commercial checking accounts offer a program where you have to approve every draft before money leaves your checking account. And I think because fraud is so prevalent and it can take so many forms, that's probably the place to stop it.
Right.
We had actually tried that, but it was just, we have a lot of transactions, a lot of small transactions running through our account, and it just seemed
Right.
to be more than we could manage.
Right.
But I think especially for a small business,
Hmm.
you need to figure out how to make that work and approve every single one of those transactions because
Hmm.
again, the smaller you are, the more likely a hack like that could totally
Right.
put you out of business. So that's where I would stop it is with that program offered by the bank where you
The other
approve
reason that's good too
every
is as small
transaction.
business owners, and I've worked with so many startups and founders, helping them, set up their businesses and their product launches and service launches and all this. One thing too about that is it's a good way to even just double check what you're spending on. It's kind of like even as consumers, before you go, you're out and you gave yourself a budget of like, oh, I'm gonna, I don't know, buy new clothes or buy new housewares or buy something for my car or whatever, and you don't give yourself a budget at all, or you do, and it's like $100, but then you end up spending 500. It's a good, just little double check on whether how important it is because you can get caught up in the moment. So, as a small business owner or as a consumer, having a, an extra step for all of your expenses can be a very good thing because at the end of the day, it's opportunity costs for you, whatever you're spending it on, and so it's not just about the cybersecurity, it's also just about helping you best manage your resources, which are very precious.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there are also schemes out there that will steal your money in small amounts and
Yes. Oh,
multiple
yes.
transactions.
Yes.
So if you
They're
set
they're
like a
legitimate.
transaction limit, yeah, that
They're
doesn't
also
help you
legal,
either.
quote unquote. They're legal and you can't get a lot of them. So
Oh,
it's
yeah.
good to have those done. That is absolutely true.
That's absolutely true.
So
Yeah.
you got now what happened then? So you got involved with law enforcement and everything. You were able to get your funds back.
We actually didn't get involved in law enforcement. No one ever contacted us, and it wasn't clear
Okay.
who
It was
to
all being done
actually
through the
contact.
receiving bank. It was all being done
Yeah.
through the receiving bank. Okay. But you
Yeah,
did, and they held your funds, and then
that's
they
correct.
ultimately sent it back, and it took several weeks, correct?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct. Yeah. And the payroll provider actually let us know that. I initially could not get any information from this payroll provider.
Hmm.
It was like the individuals who were on the ground who you have contact with as a customer
Hmm.
didn't know what was happening.
Right.
And when I was trying to, bring it to their attention, they were very much blaming and shaming me like it was user error. And,
Hmm.
the only way that I was actually able to get information from the vendor is I used my capacity as a customer success leader at a deep infrastructure technology,
Hmm.
of which this vendor is actually a customer. And I reached out to my peer in the industry and the head of global IT at this payroll vendor. And I said, hey, I have a small business and we are a customer of yours and this thing happened and I would really like to talk to you about it. I haven't been able to get any information through the usual channels. That person did contact me back and let me know that this was a targeted attempt at the HR provider, and they
Right.
put me in touch with a incident manager
Right.
who
Okay.
was able to talk to the destination banks and then
Right.
share that information back with us.
You
But I
bring up
think,
an excellent point because it's really hard when you're going through something. And let's face it, most of us, we're kind of blaming ourselves anyway. And then when you have somebody from the outside doing it, that happened to me when I had people who had broken into my home and gotten past my security system by impersonating a family member well enough that it didn't set off the alarms. So when I'm calling my security system about it, they're they're assuming that I don't know what I'm talking about and I've lost my mind. And fortunately, I had manually recorded some things that I saw on my camera that were not getting picked up to be able to tell them that these things weren't getting picked up. And they wanted to blame me and they wanted to have me be that oh, that couldn't possibly happen. It's like, well, I know it's not supposed to happen. That's why I buy your services, but I have a recording of it happening. I just want to say something about that because having to advocate for yourself while you're already feeling victimized and already have some self-doubt and you're kind of slapping your own wrist for what did I do wrong? Have the people that you're reaching out to for help do that to you. It's really difficult to stand up and advocate for yourself, but I just want to encourage everybody, advocate for yourself no matter what, because they're there to help you. And if you can just remember, the reason they're blaming you is because they're afraid of their own liability and
That's
responsibility
true.
and that it's going to cost them, either in money, time, reputation. So the only reason you're being blamed isn't because you did something wrong. It's because they're afraid that they did something wrong. And so you just have to find that part within you. And this is where it's good to have a friend or somebody you can lean into to help help you advocate. Even if they're just giving you moral support so you can go have a tough conversation. But it is so true because that's why, and Shawn, I really want to credit you. Thank you for coming on and talking about this because there are millions of people who have had your experience, but don't want to talk about it because they feel shame, they feel guilt, they feel whatever, and yet they're the victim of cybercrime. It's kind of part of the blame the victim issue that we have. And that's why it means so much to me that you came on. And I know it's meant a lot I know there's listeners out there who are going, oh, thank you, because this has happened to me, or or thank you, I can take these steps and prevent it from happening to me. And so again, whether you're a small business owner or a consumer, these are the things you have to be aware of. So we got some great tips. My gosh, this is chock full of tips we're going to need to pull out. But I think for everybody, what are your if today somebody was going to do two things to protect themselves, what would be your top two?
I think 100% anytime you're accessing an account that has access to your financials, you need to make sure you are not distracted. And if you are using a browser, you need to be typing in or at least have saved the web address of that company so that you're going to the trusted URL, the
Right,
secure URL.
right.
I think using password managers, but also looking at that two-factor authentication and potentially using something like Duo or Okta Verify versus
Mhm.
the SMS 2FA option is way more secure. And then
Right.
if you are a
And let me
business,
just say for people who aren't familiar with all those, so having two-factor authentication where like your bank, like you log in and you put your unique password in, but it will not let you in until it sends something to your phone. There's two ways to do that. There's authenticator apps and there's other things, but you can SMS scams are getting more and more common, so they can build that process in, and you still think it's your bank texting you, but it's actually coming from the bad guys. So it's not as secure as some other means. It's still more secure than not doing it. Don't get me wrong. And there's a lot of, most TFA is legitimate, but it can be impersonated. So you got to be aware of that. Yeah.
that's
Those are
right.
great tips. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Shawn. You are
Yeah.
such a bright spot and it just shows somebody with your savvy, your knowledge, your street smarts and brain smarts. It can happen to anybody. And thank you for sharing this story. It means so much to all of us. And
No, I really appreciate the forum. I think it's so important for us to talk about and what you're doing is super important. I think we're in this stage right now where talking about being hacked is kind of taboo because of the shame you mentioned, but it is becoming so prevalent. The more we talk about it, the more people will realize it's just sort of the state of things, and we have to band together to protect ourselves. And the course that you're offering is an incredible opportunity for anyone who has an opportunity to enroll and to work with you. It could mean the difference between, having a successful business or not having a business at all. And I appreciate your efforts here,
Well,
Jocelyn.
thank you so much, Shawn. And again, thank you. So, and hey, everybody, if you have a question about something that's happened to you or a topic you want me to cover, or you have a story like Shawn's and you want to tell us, please get in touch. Go to smarteronlinesafety.com and get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you and we'd love to answer your questions. So this concludes this episode of the Smarter Online Safety Podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Please take one step today as a result of something you learned here and stay safe out there, everybody.
Bye, Jocelyn.